Innovation is often seen as progress, a solution, a way forward. But history has a habit of hiding the true cost of innovation until it's too late. This is not a story about a villain. It's not a story about greed or corruption. It's the story of a man who genuinely believed he was making the world better. His name was Thomas Midgley Jr. In the early 20th century, Midgley was considered one of the most important engineers of his time. He worked at the heart of American industry during an era when technology was reshaping society faster than anyone could fully understand. Cars were becoming more common, cities were expanding, machines were replacing manual labor, and every new technology came with new problems. When those problems threatened profits or progress, companies didn't look for philosophers or ethicists. They looked for engineers. And again, they looked to Thomas Midgley Jr. Over the course of his career, Midgley would help solve two of the biggest technical challenges of the modern world. Both solutions were celebrated as breakthroughs. Both were adopted globally. And both would later be recognized as environmental and public health disasters on a scale no single individual had ever caused before. This is the story of how solving the wrong problems too well can quietly poison the world. By the early 1920s, the automobile industry was facing a problem it couldn't ignore. Car engines were becoming more powerful, but they were also becoming unstable. A phenomenon known as engine knocking caused violent vibrations, overheating, and mechanical failure. For manufacturers, this wasn't just an engineering issue. It was a threat to the future of the automobile itself. Engineers across the industry searched for a solution. They tested fuels. They modified engine designs. But nothing worked reliably. Then, Thomas Midgley Jr. made a discovery that seemed almost too good to be true. By adding a small amount of tetraethyl lead to gasoline, engine knocking disappeared. Engines ran smoother, performance improved, and production costs dropped. From an engineering perspective, it was a perfect solution. And from a business perspective, it was even better. General Motors quickly realized the implications. This wasn't just a fix, it was a competitive advantage. Leaded gasoline was patented, branded, and prepared for global distribution. The problem was solved, or so it seemed. The engines were quiet, but inside the factories, something else was beginning to tremble. The men who handled the additive worked long shifts, no masks, no real protection, just routine. They mixed it, poured it, breathed it. At first, the symptoms were subtle. A headache that wouldn't fade, hands that wouldn't stay steady, a strange metallic taste in the mouth. Then the shaking began, fingers twitching without permission, voices slurring, eyes struggling to focus. Some workers claimed they saw things that weren't there. Insects crawling across their skin. Shadows moving in empty rooms. One man ran through the plant screaming. Another collapsed without warning. Within months, several workers were hospitalized. Some never left. Newspapers started asking questions. But inside the company, the language was careful. Overexposure. Isolated incidents, improper handling. Production did not stop. Instead, Thomas Midgley Jr. stepped forward. In front of reporters, he washed his hands in leaded gasoline. He inhaled deeply, and he smiled. The message was simple. If the inventor wasn't afraid, why should anyone else be? The engines stayed quiet. The factories stayed open. And something invisible continued to spread. The factory walls contained the first victims. But the real consequences were never meant to stay inside a building. When leaded gasoline burned, it didn't disappear. It transformed. Microscopic particles were released into the air, too small to see, too light to fall quickly. They drifted across streets, across cities, across entire countries. Every passing car left behind a trace. Not smoke, not noise, but residue. The particles settled into soil, onto sidewalks, into playgrounds. Children playing near busy roads absorbed it without knowing. Through the air they breathed, through the dust on their hands. Lead does not break down. It accumulates in blood, in bones, in developing brains. The effects were not immediate. Instead, the damage was statistical. Slight reductions in IQ, increased impulsivity, higher aggression rates, spread across millions of children. Across decades, scientists would later find a chilling pattern. As lead levels rose in the atmosphere, crime rates followed. Years later, as lead levels declined, crime declined too. The connection was not perfect, but it was disturbing. Ice cores extracted from polar regions would reveal something even more unsettling. Industrial lead, embedded in layers of ancient ice. Even the most remote parts of Earth had been touched. The engines had become quiet, but the planet had changed. Slowly, permanently. By the time governments began to act, the damage was already done. For decades, scientists had warned about the dangers of lead exposure. Study after study showed the same pattern: elevated lead levels, neurological damage. But regulation moved slowly. Industry resisted. Profits were at stake. It wasn't until the late 20th century that leaded gasoline was finally phased out. Blood lead levels began to fall. Crime rates declined. The air became cleaner, but the legacy remained. Lead doesn't vanish. It lingers. In soil, in buildings, in bones. The solution came, just not in time for millions who had already been affected. The air became cleaner, but the past remained. And yet, Thomas Midgley Jr. was not finished. While the debate over lead continued, another problem demanded a solution: refrigeration. Early cooling systems relied on toxic gases: ammonia, sulfur dioxide, methyl chloride. Leaks were deadly. Entire families could suffocate in their homes. The industry needed something safer, something stable, something modern. Once again, Midgley entered the laboratory. Once again, chemistry delivered an answer: chlorofluorocarbons, later branded as Freon. The gas was non-flammable, non-toxic in small concentrations, stable. To demonstrate its safety, Midgley inhaled it in front of an audience. He extinguished a candle with his breath. The crowd applauded. It appeared to be another triumph of science, but this time the damage would rise upward, slowly, invisibly, into the upper atmosphere, where ultraviolet radiation would begin to tear the molecules apart, releasing chlorine, destroying ozone, weakening the shield that protects all life on Earth. Thomas Midgley Jr. had now introduced two substances into global circulation, both celebrated, both profitable, both catastrophic. In 1940, Thomas Midgley Jr. was no longer a rising industrial hero. Years of illness had weakened him. Polio had left him partially paralyzed. Confined to his bed, he refused to accept helplessness. So he designed one final invention: a system of ropes and pulleys attached above his bed, engineered to lift his own body. It was precise, efficient, mechanical. On November 2, 1944, Thomas Midgley Jr. was found dead, entangled in the very device he had created. The mechanism meant to give him independence had wrapped around his neck. Few inventors have altered the chemistry of an entire planet. Fewer still have been undone by their own design. Thomas Midgley Jr. changed the atmosphere of Earth, and in the end, it was engineering that closed the final loop.